Betul. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Honorable Dr. Hartono MA, Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education. The Honorable Dr. Rita Indrawati MPD, Vice Dean for Academic Affairs. The Honorable Nyimas Aisyah MPD PhD, Vice Dean for General Administration. The Honorable Dr. Ismet MSE, Vice Dean for Students Affairs. The Honorable Professor Sony Mirizan, MA EDD, the Chair of the Committee. The Honorable Visiting Professors, Professor Kathy K. Prandtl and Professor Laura Wheeler. The Honorable all of the head and secretaries of department, coordinators of study programs, lecturers, and distinguished guests. Last but not least, our respected participants, both in this room and virtual room. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Tita Ratna Wulandari. It's such a great honor for me to stand here as the master of ceremony of this amazing event. And I would like to welcome you all to the Qualitative Research Workshop with the theme Post-Humanism as Method of Inquiry, with Professor Kathy K. Prandtl and Professor Laura Wheeler. In Palembang, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sriwijaya, on Tuesday, the 25th of July, 2023. Our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite the coordinator of the workshop to deliver the program report. Please welcome the Honorable Sari Silviani MPD, MA, PhD. Time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Allahumma sholli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina. Respected Dean of the Faculty of Teachers Training and Education, Dr. Hartono. Respected Vice Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Rita Indrawati. Respected Vice Dean of Administrative and Finance, Dr. Nyimas Aisyah. And the Vice Deans of Students and Alumni Affairs, Dr. Ismet. And of course, our very honorable guests today, Dr. Kathy Prandtl and Dr. Laura Wheeler, who are with us today in our qualitative research workshop. And I also like to, first of all, I like to welcome everyone to qualitative workshop, which is part of our visiting professor programs throughout this week. Yesterday we had our first Stadium General, and then today is our first series of workshop, which focuses on qualitative research. I would like to give a short report about our activity today. So far, we had 497 participants registered who will join us virtually. They came from all over Indonesia. And we also have about 45 people, both lecturers and students in the graduate program, the master's program in Faculty of Teachers Training and Education, as well as some from graduate student transition to the master program. So we had some students who will join us this August as a new student. it should be an exciting experience for us to have this workshop. And I just want to make a little bit of correction, just a bit correction about the workshop theme. So we'll focus on educational inquiry, particularly in qualitative workshops. So we hope that we can accommodate both novice researchers as well as experienced researchers to kind of broaden our mind about the research approaches, and as well as just have a discussion on what it means to do qualitative research. I'd like to thank all the committees who have supported us in making this event possible, and I hope everyone will have a rewarding experience and will get something that they can use in their own work as a students and as students as well as researchers. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Ibu Sari Silviani, and I'm really sorry for the mistakes for the theme. Thank you for the correction. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to move on to the main agenda. Let us now begin our qualitative research workshop with enthusiasm and thirst for knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our wonderful visiting professors from Utah State University and Brigham Young University, Professor Kathy K. Trundle and Professor Laura Wheeler, as well as our brilliant moderator today, Sari Silviani, MPD, MA, PhD. To Mrs. Sari Silviani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tita, for a very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. We are ready to start our workshop today. As I mentioned in my brief remarks, we focus on some basics of qualitative research, and we will also do some interactive questions and answer in each section. So I would like everyone to pay attention to each section because our Q&A will specifically about the section. So we'll select the questions pertinent to the specific section. Because this is going to be quite a long workshop, we're going to chunk it into some sub-theme, and in each of the sub-theme, we're going to open questions. And since you are already on your table, you are welcome to, we will share the slides, but everyone should be able to see it clearly on the screen. And there will be some questions where we put the QR code for you to try and see what we have prepared in there. All right, let me start first with the introduction. I'm sure many of us are familiar with Kathy. She's no stranger for us because Kathy has been to our campus several times, and also to Indonesia for 6 visits to Indonesia, including to Kalimantan, Java, and of course to Sumatra. But I'll just reintroduce her because we have some new students who might not be here. Kathy presented her keynote speaker. First of all, I'm very delighted to meet you in person, Kathy. I was your moderator in Sule IC back in October 2022. With Laura, we've been in discussion through Zoom several times, but this is to meet her personally. Welcome. And just a little bit about our speaker today. Kathy is a professor in School of Education, Utah State University. And Laura used to be in Utah State, but now she is currently a faculty member at Brigham Young University at McKay School of Education, focusing on the Department of Elementary Education. All right. Okay, without further ado, let's start with the first section of our agenda today. Kathy?
Thank you for the warm welcome. It's very delightful to be here with you. We are both very honored to be invited to come and work with you. I've been working with Pak Hartono, your Honorable Dean, since 2008 when we worked together at The Ohio State University in the United States in the state of Ohio. And then I've been working in Indonesia, traveling to Indonesia since 2011, so for the past 12 years. So I have been very honored to come and work with you both in person and then also distance through Zoom. We have a large group here that we're doing a collaborative international research project with. One of the courses that I teach at Utah State and that I also taught at Ohio State is qualitative research methods. So what Dr. Wheeler and I are going to do, Laura and I are going to do, is to share with you some basic information and some specific information about qualitative methods. So I wanted to start out by saying Salamat Pagi. And I'm always grateful to be able to speak in the morning. I can remember Salamat Pagi. I have more trouble with the evening. But my daughter came with me the first time that I came to Indonesia. We were on the island of Java in Semarang, and we were at UNES University. And we had the privilege of traveling to Borobudur on that trip. So we love coming to visit with you. We love the culture and the people, and also the food. So our agenda for today . Our agenda for today includes what is research in general, what are research paradigms, and what are the two major research paradigms, and that applies broadly beyond education. Then the hallmarks of qualitative research. What makes something qualitative research? We will be doing a comparison of qualitative and quantitative research reports in published articles in the workshop, and the workshop is on Friday. On Thursday afternoon, we have a writing workshop about publishing in reputable journals. So at that time, we're going to compare qualitative and quantitative research reports. Then we'll talk about methods of inquiry, and there are many different ways to slice up the different methods. We're going to talk about the 5 major basic methods of inquiry in qualitative research. Then I'll provide you with some examples. So we'll compare them and then some specific examples to see how those play out in the research field. Then we'll talk about trustworthiness and its trustworthiness in qualitative research as opposed to validity and reliability in quantitative research. And then we'll look at the theoretical perspectives for research. And Laura is going to start us off with what is research?
So I want to give you guys a minute to think to yourself, if you had to define research, how would you do that? And then I want you to pair up with someone at your table, or you can talk as a table, and then be ready to share out what you think research is. So we'll give you just a couple minutes. So go ahead and get started. Okay, about 30 more seconds, and then we're going to pull you back in. Not very long.
So I know many of you can speak English, so you can respond in English later on. But if you need to say it in Bahasa Indonesia, we'll have a translation for you. So don't worry.
I can see that you guys are working hard. And while you're working, maybe we can ask somebody who is on Zoom to share their idea, and you can share it in the comment section of what you think research is.
Can we show it on the screen over here, or do you want to select that first, Tita? Okay, not yet.
We'll give the people on Zoom a minute to write some ideas down and share those comments.
So for those of you listening to this workshop from Zoom, you are welcome to interact with us with the chat box. We will show your opinions or questions from the chat box.
Okay. Wonderful. If you have an idea of what you think research is, no right or wrong answers. We just want to know what you think.
Okay, excuse me. I want to try to answer your question. I want to introduce myself first. My name is Fitri Ramadhani. I'm from Mathematics Education. Okay, in my opinion, research is the investigation and the study of materials, source, things, or other to find the fake or the new conclusion of the research. Like we have a new concept, methodologies, and understanding of some we study. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing. So she used some really important words. She said investigation, new knowledge, new concepts, and gaining understanding of new things. Excellent. All really good descriptive words. Anyone else who would like to share?
Ya, boleh silakan pakai bahasa Indonesia.
Tas. Baik, perkenalkan nama saya Detia dari program studi Magister Pendidikan Bahasa. Menurut saya, penelitian itu adalah kegiatan pemecahan masalah dan pengujian suatu hipotesis secara sistematis. Tujuannya untuk memecahkan permasalahan yang ditemukan tersebut. Ya, terima kasih.
Okay, so this is Detia from Indonesian Language Education Program. And she said research is an activity where you solve a certain problem in a systematic way. So that's the gist of it, to get the answers of the questions systematically.
I like your emphasis on systematic. That's a very good descriptive word. Anybody else who would like to share?
All right. My name is Nabila Tasha. I'm from a Master Degrees of English Education. So, in my opinion, research is systematic and organized process of investigating, studying, and exploring a problem and problem or a specific question to gain the new knowledge and understanding. So in research, the goal of the research is to contribute to the existing of body of knowledge in particular field, and the researchers use the various method in research. It depends on the nature of the study, such as a qualitative and quantitative, or we use the experiments, surveys, literature reviews, and much more. Thanks, Delso.
You had a lot of wonderful things today, but one of the things I really liked that you said was different methods
Yes.
depending on your question.
Yeah.
So really good emphasis there. Is there anyone on Zoom or who has a comment?
So we have Rizka Hasana. May I read it, Bu? Yeah. So we have Rizka Hasana here. She said that research is the systematic process of examining theories, facts, practical application.
These are all really good answers. And
we have Nais Saraswati. Research means digging deeper into a specific topic to come up with the reason, impacts, determining factors behind certain phenomena or issue. I think we need Pak Ali to help to show the comments. Okay.
well, thank you for sharing, those of you who are on Zoom. These are really insightful, great comments about what is research. So if we could go to our next slide, please.
Pak Ali, can you stop the slide share?
So although these were already mentioned, I'll briefly summarize them again. Research, we could say, is the process of inquiry, or asking questions and then systematically answering those questions with data. Next slide. So like was mentioned previously, it's systematic. It should be rigorous and knowledge driven, meaning we want to acquire new knowledge or add to a body of knowledge. We do this by answering our questions that we asked. And like was mentioned previously, those questions that we ask can drive the methods that we use to answer them. We are solving problems, and we should be developing, refining, validating, and expanding the body of knowledge that is already known with what is, and expanding into what is unknown. Next slide, please. So I want to stop at this point and ask if there are any questions from you at this point. Research. Do you have any questions about what is research?
Anyone from the Zoom can also ask questions.
I'm really impressed with your base knowledge of what is research. So I can tell that you've been studying about research. So thank you for participating.
Anyone would like to have a question about what we have talked about before we move on to the next subtopic? Any questions from the audience here in the room or in the Zoom?
Well, if there are no questions, we'll move on to our next slide. I have another question for you, but I'm going to make this trickier. You can't use your phones and or go online. No Google.
Don't
no
go
Google.
online. If you don't have question, you got questions. So that's
Yeah.
what it is.
So, I just want to know what you think right now without the internet. What is a research paradigm?
Okay. What is a research paradigm? Anyone from the room and from the Zoom?
And
No cheating. Yeah,
no,
don't
yeah,
open
no
any.
looking, but you can talk to each other. Because maybe
Yes.
someone at your table is familiar with a research paradigm and you can share your ideas. So you have 2 minutes, and those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to think about this and be ready to share what is a research paradigm.
Okay, no one opening their laptop or their phones. I know that some of you know, so don't hesitate to share your opinion. We have one from this table, I believe.
Okay.
Like I said, this is an open discussion, no right
We
or
just-
wrong.
No
like
right or wrong.
Laura
We just want to
says.
know what you think.
What is research paradigm? You can talk, but no picking at your phone. Anyone from the Zoom? Do we have any comments? Not yet. Okay, it's a bit challenging now, Laura.
Yeah, this one is much trickier because it might mean something different to different people. So we're going to find out what you think.
Just say what you have in mind. I believe, someone else will add to your answers. Maybe you have some
Yes.
partial, understanding of that, and then others can jump in and give their opinion too. You don't have to have a
Absolutely.
complete answer,
No?
right?
We have
And-
one in Zoom here.
Wonderful.
Rina Octavianti. She thinks that research paradigm deals with research framework, both theories and practices.
Okay. So a framework.
Yeah.
And if you want to add on to that idea framework and share your ideas,
Or maybe example of paradigms, if you're gonna define them. Any examples, maybe, then we can go from there to.
There are lots of research paradigms, and people conflate words. Sometimes they conflate paradigm with theory and with methods of inquiry. So we are using the term paradigm as the overarching umbrella for qualitative and quantitative paradigms. And then Laura is going to share with you the distinct characteristics between qualitative and quantitative. So think about, if those are the two paradigms we're going to talk about today, what do you think that overarching umbrella is for qualitative or quantitative?
okay, is there anyone who would be willing to share your idea of what you might think a paradigm, research paradigm might be?
Bisa melalui contoh, boleh juga berbahasa Indonesia. Just asking them if they want to say it in bahasa Indonesia, if it's easier. Ya. Jadi paradigm atau paradigma riset Bisa berupa kuantitatif atau kualitatif. Silakan kalau ada yang ingin menambahkan.
And we could go to the next slide. So hopefully I can help you answer this question of what a paradigm is. So an easy way that I think of what a paradigm is I think of it as a lens or something that I look through that helps me view. Next slide. Of looking at the world. Next slide. There can be multiple perspectives or ways to view the world. For instance, if I am holding a lens that I look through and Dr. Trundle is holding a lens that she looks through, we might see it differently from our unique perspectives, even though we're looking through the same lens. Or we might be using different lenses.
What are some things that might cause us to look at things differently? What causes us to look out at the world and interpret it differently from another person?
So this is our question for you.
Now, on this one,
What will influence how we might see the world differently? I'll give you an example and then you think.
yeah, if you can back up to the colored glasses. The colored glasses, the previous slide. And this happens in the United States. You might have seen this in movies or in television shows where, let's say, a murder takes place or a car accident takes place and you have witnesses. Okay, the witnesses, are all of their accounts the same every time? So if we see a car accident outside and I'm up here in this room looking out and someone's across the street, do you think our reports will be exactly the same or different? They're going to be different. So why would we have different reports? Well, why would we describe that accident differently?
So in research, there might have been a research question or a phenomenon, but we might see that differently depending on the lens that we look through. As an example, maybe some of my life experiences. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years in a public school. Maybe that influences how I perceive the phenomenon versus maybe Kathy taught in a private school. Maybe we see education slightly differently from our different perspectives. Can you think of anything else that might influence how we see a phenomenon or how we see what we think is real?
Oke, tadi Laura menjelaskan tentang lenses yang kita pakai untuk melihat suatu fenomena. Jadi salah satu contohnya adalah Laura yang mengajar di satu sistem pendidikan, misalnya negeri, kemudian dengan guru yang mengajar di swasta, tentu akan melihat sesuatu hal atau fenomena tersebut secara berbeda. Adakah hal lain yang membuat cara kita melihat sesuatu itu berbeda?
One example that Laura gave was work experience. Work experience can influence your perspective. Your educational level can influence your perspective. The things that you are studying in school. Some of you are mathematics pre-service teachers or mathematics students. Some of you are science students. So the kinds of courses you take influence your perspective. So it can have everything about your life experience, work, education, where you grew up, the religion that you practice, the family interactions that you have, that all influences your perspective.
great. Thank you. So the two major research paradigms, if we had to break the research into two categories, we could break those down into qualitative, which is a lens of how I might see research, or quantitative, which is another lens of how I might see research or a phenomenon. Which lens I use might be influenced by ontology. Next slide. The ontology can be described your belief about reality. It assumes that there is a truth that can be discovered if I look through a quantitative lens. In other words, ontology would say, what is real? Is this table real? Can this table be quantified? If I believe that this table is real and that it can be quantified, this has truth, then I might look with a lens that's called realism, where I assume that truth can be found, understood, and described. However, if I look through this qualitative lens, I might assume that if I look through that lens, I might say, well, it depends. The truth of this table depends on where I am sitting in the room. For instance, those people in the very back of the room, can they see the table? Maybe not. To them, the table may not be real because they don't have the perspective where they can possibly know it exists. Where to me, from this perspective, it might look like this, but from someone sitting at the table, they are experiencing that table uniquely to them. So if I look through a qualitative lens, I assume that reality might be dependent upon the individual and their location and their perspective and their experiences and where they are. And you can see that that is a different paradigm than quantitative when I say, this table is real, it exists in these dimensions, this is the size, this is the shape, and this is how it is experienced. And all people, I assume, understand the truth of this table. Now, I'm using the example of a table, but it can be any truth that can, or that we assume can be known. Kathy, would you like to add any descriptive onto that?
Okay, thinking about realism versus constructivism. Realism looks at an external reality that we can discover. That reality is external to us. On the qualitative side, with relativism, it's not anything goes. It's that what I know is dependent on my experiences. That my knowledge is constructed through the lens of my experiences. So they're both data-driven. So one is not more accurate than the other. It approaches it from different lenses. So in terms of quantitative, you can quantify the dimensions of that table. You can also describe it qualitatively. For example, let's look at on a table. Some of you are how many of you are mathematics people? We have one mathematics person. So for our mathematics people, what could we measure about the table you're sitting at? Someone said the length. You could measure the length. What else could you measure? The area. You could calculate the area, the surface area of the top. You could calculate the volume underneath the table. So those are things you can quantify. Okay, so that's quantitative, means numbers that can be quantified. Qualitative are qualities that you could measure, but with qualitative descriptions, you're not measuring them, you're describing them. So who can give me a qualitative description of the table? So no numbers. How could you describe your table? Someone said it's white. What part of the table is white? White's the color white. The white color, and is all the table white? No, the surface, the top surface is white. So that is qualitative. So that has two qualitative aspects, the color and where the color is located. What's another qualitative description of the table? The shape. You can describe the shape of it also is qualitative. And the color of the legs is qualitative. We could describe where the table is located in the room quantitatively. We could measure how far it is from the door, your table, quantify it from the door, or we could describe it relatively. Here's the relativism. This is the first set of tables from the door. So at the front, first set of tables, second set of tables from the door. That's the first row. So, and we're looking at ordinal here. So that one qualitatively is closest to the door in the second row, right? So those are qualitative descriptions, and it's relative to other things. Okay, do you see that? Okay, is one of those more correct than the other? Or are they both correct? They're both correct. So it's not that one is right and the other is wrong, or one is more accurate. It's a different way to describe it. One involves numbers and one involves qualitative descriptions.
One of the wonderful things about qualitative research is your experience of sitting at this table might be different than somebody else who is sitting at that table. You might be having different lived experiences, which we may not fully understand if we were only using numbers to describe the table. Next slide. Do you have any questions at this point about the research paradigms and quantitative versus qualitative, or realism versus relativism?
So go ahead, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands and I'll bring the microphone to you. You can say it in English or in Bahasa Indonesia.
Well, we can go ahead and go on then. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. In addition to ontology, which is concerned with what is truth, now we move on to epistemology. Next slide, please. Epistemology is how do we know, or how can we come to know? It is a way of knowing. So if I know this is a table, how do I know? How do I know that this is table? So maybe I've had experiences that have allowed me to know what a table is. and I have assumptions about that. With positivism, which is on the quantitative lens side, the researcher outside is striving for an objective measure. I'm saying, I know that this is table because tables are this size and shape, and they can be described in 3 dimensions with length, width, and height. I have a numeric way of describing what is table. So this is how I know. Versus the qualitative paradigm or lens, the researcher is inside co-constructing the reality. In this case, I want to come and I say, this is what it feels like. What's it like to be at this table? Now I know how high it is, and I can help to describe it using my words and my experience and my thoughts of what that is like. Kathy, would you like to add anything on about epistemology? Okay. Do you have any questions about the naturalist researcher approach to knowing what is truth versus a positivist approach to knowing what is truth or what is real?
Prof. Laura, we have one question from Zoom. Tia R. She questioned when we can use qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method in a research.
Yes, that is a really good question. So maybe I will throw out an example and you tell me what would be best. If I want to know in education how students would describe their experience learning literacy, how are they going to describe what it's like for them? Would I be using a naturalist, qualitative, or do I want a quantitative lens to know what their description is of what it's like? The qualitative, if I want to know the average participant scores after I have taught a literacy, I want to know what that's like generalized across my class. What lens am I looking through? Yeah. Now, in one, the quantitative, I'm assuming the truth is that I can accurately, or I'm striving for this objective measure of what my literacy lesson, how it impacted students, versus in the other, I want their description, their view of what is real or reality in that resulting from that literacy lesson. Kathy, anything to add?
Thank you. I do want to say that we tend to say that quantitative is objective, and then people will say that qualitative is subjective. All research is subjective, meaning every decision you make is subjective. For example, what question you ask is subjective. What you accept as data, that's subjective. So one is not truly objective. They both are subjective, and we have to be aware of that subjectivity because it's about how you gather data, what you consider as data, how you analyze the data. So both are subjective. The one is striving to look at, one believes there's an objective reality. The other one believes that we can approximate that reality. So we can't fully know it, but we can approximate it.
we have one more question from
Wonderful.
Zoom. From Nurvita Sari, what are the key differences between qualitative and quantitative research methods?
Ah, that
And
is
what
such a
types?
good question that we're not going to answer it yet, but we will get there. But that is a really excellent question that I hope you're starting to think about now. We'll go on to the next slide, please. We had that wonderful question, and now, okay, what do you see? What is real on this board behind me?
Just speak louder, or if you need microphone, anyone who can just speak. So what do you see?
Do you see tiles? Can you describe these tiles to me?
Let's do some qualitative and quantitative descriptions.
Yeah.
How can you describe it
Different
qualitatively
co-
and quantitatively?
Sorry.
Okay.
I
Go ahead.
see different color, different shop.
Color. Yes.
Yes.
Mm.
Colors and shapes.
Mm.
Excellent. Any other descriptions? What color do we see? Blue. Are they all the same blue? Ah, we have different shades of blue. How many shades of blue? Okay. What about the shape? Are they all different?
What do they all have in common?
Oh, we have some cubes. What else? And some rectangles. Excellent.
How many corners?
Uh,
How many sides?
Okay. So my math people, maybe your lived experience. When you saw this, you started thinking, quadrilaterals. That's your experience, right? But if we use only one paradigm to understand this phenomenon, we are limiting our full understanding. If we only use quantitative descriptions for this, and we're only describing blue squares or rectangles, this image would represent all that we can know. We can see different sizes and shapes and shades of the color blue, but all we really know is blue rectangles. So if all we were ever using was one lens, this is all we would ever be able to know and describe. Next slide.
Okay, and on this, in turn, and
Oh, go back one. Thank
Back.
you.
back, yeah, that one. So that on this one, if the phenomenon we are trying to understand is why do so few women go into physics, pursue physics degrees, there are fewer women and fewer people, underrepresented groups, like in the United States, African American and Hispanic. There are fewer minorities in physics, and we want to understand that phenomenon. And all we ever do is send out a survey and ask people why they did not pursue physics. That's all we can ever know. The questions we ask on the survey are all we can ever know about that phenomenon. So we're concerned that more women and minorities are not going into physics. So doing a big survey, and we did a big survey in Indonesia, and we had over 2,000, and if you participated, we are very grateful. In that survey, 2,000 participants in that survey. That gave us a lot of data. But all we can contribute are these blue rectangles. It's important, and we're publishing it, and we're presenting it, but it also is all we can know. So it's interesting, but it's not as interesting as
As if you'll go to the next slide, there is a section of blue tiles only. And if we just had that one research project looking through that one lens or that one survey, all we would see is a small section of all that could be known. What if, instead of just a survey, what if I went and conducted an interview with these women and said, why did you choose to go into physics? What drew you to this field? Tell me about your experience. Or what if I used multiple data sources from many different lenses, and I could use qualitative, quantitative, or like was mentioned previously, a mixed methods, and I conducted many different researches on that topic. Now, when I put all that research together, we get a more complete view of the phenomenon.
So on this, you don't have to do all that research yourself. You don't have to be the one doing all those projects. You can do survey research all the time. And you contribute to what we know as if this represents the body of knowledge, there are blue rectangles up there, right? And different shades of blue rectangles. So if that represents survey research, those researchers don't have to do anything else other than that. They've contributed to the picture. But like Laura said, she could go interview women and say, why did you persist in physics? I could do an ethnographic study and go spend an entire semester in a physics class and look at the interactions between the students. Look at the interactions between the students and the professor. Look at how the professor interacts with women and men. So Laura's contribution with her survey research are the yellow rectangles. And mine are the little orange dots, the circular. So we're contributing to the bigger picture of what we know. So one researcher doesn't have to do all of that research. It can be from many different researchers. But the point is, if you back up to the blue, back up one slide, if we only do survey research, it's important and it helps us understand and we can know from more people. But that's all we can know. And it's not as interesting as or as complete as the next slide, where we have survey research and other methodologies. So the point is, one is not better than the other. The point is they both contribute to what we know. Not both, but all contribute to what we know.
So we'll go to our next slide and open it up to you. Do you have any questions thus far?
Okay, one question from the middle table.
I want to ask about this topic. In the first slide about the research, we have the refining. And the paradigm is the multiples of perspective to looking something or the word. So how to refining the issue or the phenomenon in the research to find the new conclusion with the qualitative or the quantitative research, like the important thing in the research we should do. Thank you.
That is a really good question. I think you're saying, I'm going to repeat it back. You want to know how I know as a researcher which lens to use. Is that what you're asking? How I would know which one?
How to refining the issue or the idea in the research,
Oh,
because we have multiple perspective in to find something.
oh, okay. So I'll give you an example. I hope I answer your question. So I recently conducted a study on the self-efficacy for engineering design for science teachers because it's a new phenomenon that science teachers are now supposed to teach engineering. But there had been much research done in elementary. And so I had to say, I need a new perspective, something that hasn't been done before, and it hadn't been studied in secondary. So I tried to find an area that had not been studied so I could complete a better picture. And so I chose to work with secondary science instead of elementary. And then it helped because you may not want to keep asking the same question over and over again, but maybe take a slightly different perspective. Does that help answer your question? The lens I looked through was I was trying to find an opening in the research that someone hadn't already asked the question before.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
And part of the answer to that is a lit review. You do a literature review to figure out what has been done and what has not been done. And also you're looking at what kinds of things in your field people are doing research on right now. In the workshop we're going to do on Thursday, on publication, we're going to look at how to identify a researchable topic. So that's a great question. So to identify it, you look at the existing literature on what's been done and not been done. You look at the trends in your specific field. And then you look at your lens that you use is dependent on the question you ask. So excellent question. Laura and I do a great job tag teaming. So thank you, Laura. Let's give a round of applause for Laura. And we're going to tag team on the others as we're going through. Someone asked earlier about the differences between qualitative and quantitative. So on the next slide. So looking at qualitative research, we're going to go through each one of these on they vary in context, in general, the methods that we use, the relationship of the researcher to the participants, the focus of the research, and then is the study dynamic or is it static? Emergent is dynamic and changing. Or is it static? Is it interpretivist or reductionist? And then is it a big T capital truth, meaning the truth is external and I can discover it? Or am I trying to understand truth and that I can approximate it? Okay, so, and on the next slide, and I will share these slides with your instructor, and she'll make those available to you. So you'll be able to have these slides. The next slide. Now I think back up one. We went one too far. Okay. May I? Do you mind? This one. That one. Okay. So the context for qualitative research is in the natural world. So if you're going to study about why women don't pursue physics or why they do pursue physics. That's going to take place in the context of where they're working in physics or where they are studying physics. Okay, the quantitative can take place in laboratories or it's sending out surveys, but it is more detached from the actual context. So qualitative research tends to be more naturalistic. In terms of methods, there are multiple methods in qualitative research, and they include, in general, interviews and observations. It can include document analysis. It can include archives. So if I'm studying a physics class and trying to understand why women are not pursuing physics, I can look at the physics textbook. That can be a data source for me. I can look at the syllabus. I can look at the students' journal entries. So that's multiple methods for data gathering. But primarily in qualitative research, it's observations and interviews. In terms of relationship with the participants, in qualitative research, we call them participants rather than subjects. A lot of quantitative now calls them participants also, but the people in the study are more participatory than having research done on them. They are involved in the study. So it is more respectful of the participants. The focus for the qualitative research is very context dependent. So the context is important. That's why it's not usually done in a laboratory. So it's done in a naturalistic environment. In terms of static or emergent, it in general is emergent and evolving. So in terms of what we understand about a phenomenon, we continue to gather data about it and continue our understanding. This is part of the nature of science. Science is tentative, and that's a strength. As we gather more data, we understand more, and our knowledge base changes. So it recognizes that the knowledge base is emergent, that it is dynamic and changing, and that is a strength. We can gather new data and have new perspectives on the phenomenon. We can reanalyze old data in a new way and better understand the phenomenon. The next one is it is interpretivist. So you're looking at data and looking to find patterns. So you're not reducing the phenomenon to individual components. You're looking at interpreting that phenomenon. And then it is a lowercase truth, meaning that we are continually seeking to describe the reality, but we will never be able to find the ultimate truth. That there is not an external ultimate truth. Our understanding of the truth is how well we are able to use tools to gather data to understand it. So we're not discovering, we are describing as we go. So I think the next one is a question. So questions on the hallmark. Yes.
Thank you for the chance. Maybe I want to ask something about qualitative research. About the method is about interview. Actually, we're going to have some of respondent when we do some interview. So my question is, how we do the conclusion or to describe the result of their interview, their opinion about our deep interview in the research. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. In terms of, and it's a great question, in terms of gathering data, I mentioned gathering data from observations and interviews. Usually the first thing you do is organize it. And if it's an interview, you transcribe it, and then you read it, you make notes on it, and you look for patterns. So it's always about pattern recognition. So you're looking for what are the words you can use to categorize, and then you're categorizing the categories. So you're determining your codes. So that's the short answer. So questions on the hallmarks of qualitative research. Do you have anything else on that, Laura, for hallmark? Okay. So next, this is what we're going to do on Thursday that I mentioned. So I hope you will be there and some of these questions will be answered on Thursday. We're going to look at publishing in reputable journals. These are the topics that we're going to discuss at that time, looking at overall differences between qualitative and quantitative looking at how they gather data, how they analyze data, how they present their results, how they describe their results, and then any other differences. So it's an analysis. In that workshop, we'll look at 2 different articles by the same researcher at Ohio State University, and she has a qualitative study and a quantitative study, and we're going to compare those as part of that workshop. So some of the questions will be answered then. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide and then the next one. Okay, so on this one, this is where we're going to look at the methods of inquiry. So there are lots of methods of inquiry in qualitative research, and we are going to focus on the 5 most common, and those are down here at the bottom: phenomenology, ethnography, case studies, grounded theories, and then archival data that may include biographies. So that's where we're going. I'm going to show you a matrix that I put together for my doctoral students at Utah State. We're going to go through it and look at across each one of these on how they compare, on the purpose, how they're gathering data, on what they're focusing on. And then we will do each one of those comparisons. We have a QR code. After we've talked about it, you can download it and have the whole thing, so you don't have to take notes as we're going through. Okay, so I will give you the matrix that is complete. And then I'll give you an example from each one of those 5. So that's the roadmap of where we're going. Okay, next one. So here is the empty matrix. The 5 are across the top. Those are the methods of inquiry. So we're going to compare purpose, unit of analysis, how we're collecting data, who is producing the knowledge, what is the researcher's role, then any other distinctions to help you know which category it would fit into, and then I have a sample from each one. Any questions at this moment on this task that we're getting ready to do? And remember, I will give you the completed one when we're done, so you don't have to take the notes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so looking across the purposes, if you notice, the first 2, case study and ethnography, are very similar. They're both looking at describing a group. So a group of people. One of them focuses on cases of people, like a classroom. That could be a case. A school could be a case. You could have a group of women physicists. That could be a case study. So, but it's looking at those cases. The ethnography is looking at the culture of that group. So that's where I mentioned when Laura's going to go interview those women about why they chose to go into physics, hers would probably be a case study. If I'm going to observe for an entire semester in that physics course and look at the interactions in the course, look at the textbook, look at the syllabus, look how the professor interacts with men and women and others, and then look at how the students interact with each other, look at the kinds of questions the professor asks of different genders, that would be an ethnography. So it has to do with focusing on a group. Okay, phenomenology, in contrast, focuses on an individual. It's understanding an individual's lived experience. It's not just one person. That's a misnomer, but it's the individualized experiences of people in a certain category. So it's not looking at their interactions as a group together. The first one looks at them as a group. The second one looks at them as a group in their context, in their culture. A lot of anthropology work is ethnographic. So if I wanted to understand artist in Ubud in Bali, I would love to do that. I'd love to go live in Bali and live there for a year and study the artist in that colony. That would be ethnography. I'm looking at the artist in their context, in their culture, to better understand them. So look at how they support each other. How do they compete with each other? How do they encourage each other? So that would be more of an ethnography, and it's a longer period of time usually. Phenomenology, I would want to look at the individual experiences to see about, if I wanted to look at, to understand about artists in Ubud and why they chose, I want to come up with a model on why some family artists continue for generations and some don't. I want to look at the lived experiences of the artists who have apprenticed with their fathers or mothers and continue with the batik. So I'm trying to understand and make a model of who's going to continue those family traditions and who might not continue those family traditions. But I would interview and work with in-depth interviews over and over again to really understand that batik artist that learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, and what about their experience, their lived experience, encouraged them to pursue that and to continue that family tradition. And I could do that with one family, one artist, and then I go to another artist and I do the same thing. Another artist who has carried that tradition on. I keep adding individuals to my phenomenology until I don't get any new data. So when I'm hearing the same stories over again, I stop. So I keep interviewing people who fit in that category to try to understand their lived experiences. And I can look across those lived experiences. And it doesn't just apply to artists. It could be chemists. So you have a chemist, and her son became a chemist also. So you look at the lived experiences. So instead of these, we're looking at, case study looks at the whole group. So I could go out and interview all of the batik artists in Ubud. And the ethnography, I can go live in Ubud and try to understand the culture and how it supports that artistic community. You see how those are different studies. And then I want to understand carrying on family traditions in the arts and why some people choose to do that. So it's a different focus on those. Okay, grounded theory is about developing a theory. And we're going to look at that one specifically. And then the last one is interpreting perspectives from text or interpreting perspectives from audio recordings. So those are the purposes across those. And now next we're going to look at the unit of analysis. Okay, so hang on just a second for units of analysis. Back up to the other slide there. So on the case study, what are we studying? Are we studying groups or individuals? Or tell me this, which ones are studying groups? Case studies and ethnographies, which ones are studying individuals? Phenomenology. And then grounded theory can vary, and then historical biographical also varies. Those are records, so they're from people or from groups of people, but they're archived. I can't interview those people because they're transcripts of meetings. For example, I have a friend who did research on government officials and how they make education decisions and laws and rules, and she went to the transcripts from those legislative sessions. So she didn't interview those people. She looked at what they said in the context of that meaning, of that meeting. Okay, next. The next slide. Okay, so units of analysis for group, we'll click on the next one. We said ethnography, case studies, and usually grounded theory is a group of people. So you want enough of the people to be able to make predictions or come up with a theory on why some event occurs. So those involve groups. The individual is phenomenology. And we keep interviewing single individuals until we have no more data. So it's more than one individual. You're just not looking at them as a group. You do one at a time. And in depth. And then the last one for language and communication with archives. Those are audio recordings and also written, and that's hermeneutics, and especially when it applies to religious text. Okay. Next. So the unit of analysis, as we said, we've got case study, ethnography, grounded theory for group. So if you want to look at a group of people, you're going to be working in one of those methods of inquiry. If you're looking at individuals, you're looking at phenomenology. If you're looking at text or audio recordings, that would be the archives. And next. For data collection, so what did we talk about the two primary types of data collection for qualitative? Your two primary are interviews and observations. So interviews and observations, thank you. So the case studies, ethnographies, and phenomenology all involve interviews. The main one for case study and ethnography, they include observations, especially for ethnography, that is participant observation. What that means is I go live in that context. So I go live in Ubud and study the culture in Ubud, the people and culture. Or I attend every session of a physics class for an entire semester to understand that culture. So on ethnography, the researcher is a participant observer. So I am a member of that community. I become a member of that community. The case study is doing naturalistic observations, but may or may not participate. Okay, phenomenology relies on in-depth interviews. So that one is almost exclusively interviews and or documents. Then grounded theory relies on interviews with many people. So that's a distinction between phenomenology and grounded theory. Is the grounded theory, you're tending to have more people that you interview. We could interview for phenomenology, we could end up interviewing 3 people or 5 people or 6 people. In grounded theory, you're talking about interviewing maybe 50 people. So it's a difference in scale and a difference in the kind of question you want to ask. And Laura and I worked on these to pigeonhole them to help you understand them as a starting place. So this can help you understand where you might want to fit your question. Okay, next. Okay, the knowledge producer. So where is the knowledge coming from? On case study, it's the participants. So this is from their interviews and from the researchers' observations. From the ethnography, since the researcher is a participant, it's coming from the researcher and the participant because the researcher is part of that culture. I'm living in that classroom, not all day, not living literally, but I'm in there for every class session. So I am part of that culture. And I'm participating in that culture. Phenomenology, it's coming from the participants. Grounded theory is coming from the participants. The historical is coming from the records, but the researcher is having to interpret those records. without interviews of the people who created them. Okay, and next. So researcher role for case study is engaged, but it is more naturalistic. So more naturalistic means I'm mostly sitting back and observing in the class. And then if someone comes up and asks me a question, then I can answer that question, but I'm not helping teach. I'm not participating as a student. I'm sitting back and observing. This would be like Jane Goodall observing chimpanzees, Diane Fossey observing the mountain gorillas, or someone observing orangutans and sitting back and observing them, but I don't interact with them. If they come over and interact with me, I interact with them, but I mostly sit back and observe. Ethnography means that I am participating in that culture. I am going to community meetings in Ubud. I go to the council meeting. I participate in the celebrations in the community. I participate in the art. So I am interacting with the culture and the people. So that the difference between case study and ethnography is that the case study would say that they try to avoid interfering. I want to sit back and observe. If they interact with me, I'll keep my interactions to a minimum. Ethnography, I become part of that culture. So I want to understand the culture, so I become part of it. The phenomenology is detached, meaning you're not interacting with the culture, you're asking questions and probing deeper with the individuals, but they are in-depth interviews, and you are not having a conversation, you're asking them questions. You ask follow-up questions, and you might have 20 interviews with that person. So you have fewer people and more interviews per participant. And it depends on what you want to know. Grounded theory tends to be detached. So you're doing interviews and you're not interacting in a way to engage with the participants other than asking the questions. And then for the historical, the researcher is an interpreter. So which one up there has the researcher being most engaged in the research? Ethnography. And which one is probably going to take a longer period of time? Ethnography. Okay, and in terms of ethnography, the major focus is on the culture. The culture of that classroom, the culture of the school, the culture of the artist community, the culture of your university, the culture of women physicists working in the field. So that is focusing on the culture and the individuals in the culture. Okay, any questions so far on what we've done through here, through researcher role? Yes. It's a lot of information, I know. I'm happy for you to email me. I'm happy to talk to you about it. And you're going to receive this so you can look at it, think about it, and you can ask me questions today, tomorrow, Thursday, or Friday. Yes.
Thank you. Actually, I am from biology education. So now we just develop our research about the ethnobotany in
Yes.
in our department. So it's interesting to me to ask the question. Maybe I read really bit confused about the ethnography and phenomenology. So actually, we have the method of the ethnography. We interview the tribe of the head of the tribe in the
Yes.
community. Actually, it is a one person. So I really a little bit confused. It's our research. It is being ethnography or phenomenology. So because if I'm not mistake, should we live in that area when we use or when we want to go to ethnography research? Yeah.
This is a really great question. And the important part of that is you have options. I don't have enough information to answer your question at this moment. So we'll have to talk together so I can understand what you want to know. So the other good news is there is no right or wrong answer. It depends on what you want to know, and it will help you shortly. Laura and I have put together some examples so that you can decide on what is it you want to really understand, and then we can help look at it. So I'll need more information, and I'll give you more information.
Okay. We just want to know what plant that used by the community to be the medicine in that area. So yeah, so we usually have an interview, but not live in that area. So
Right.
yeah, so it is about the phenomenology or
Okay.
yeah,
So, okay.
about how the plant that use that community for medicine.
Okay, that's okay.
Yes,
Now I
thank you.
have enough information now to help you answer your question. Okay, so you're focusing on what plants the people use, correct? In a certain geographic area. Okay, this is a great example. So where is it going to fit better? You're not going there to live and observe and be part of the community. You're going and interviewing people, correct? Okay, are you focusing on their lived experiences, for example, on how they learned to collect those? You're doing that part too, how they learned to collect it, who taught them about the use of plants, medicinal plants. Okay, and you're looking at what plants they use. Are you looking at them? What is their role in the community? Are they like a healer in the community? What is their role? How do you choose who's going to be in your study?
Head of tribe.
Oh,
We usually interview head of tribe to know what people use, what plant that used by the community to incur something.
okay. So based on what you said right there, if you're looking at what plants they're using in a geographic area and you're interviewing the head of the tribe, then where does that sound like that would fit? You're not going to live there
No.
and study the culture.
No.
So which one is it not? It is not. If you're not looking at the culture, then it can't be one of those. We already exclude one.
I think if I'm not in that community, I think it's phenomenology.
Okay, now my question is, which one is it not? If you're not studying the culture, we can get rid of one now. We're eliminating. And we're eliminating ethnography. It can't be ethnography unless we're looking at the culture and you're going there to live and understand the culture. Okay, so we've got it narrowed down to, because we want to understand about the use of plants, but are we looking at, now we're not talking about how many people you interview. I think that's why you're getting confused.
Yes.
Okay, so if your question is, what plants are they using in this geographic area? The geographic area is a tribe, correct? So is that an individual? Is the tribe an individual or a group?
Individual.
The tribe is an individual?
Yes. No. The head of the
Okay.
The
But
head.
are you studying the head, or are you studying what the whole tribe uses as plants?
Sometimes we just interview the head of tribe.
Okay.
Sometimes we interview the community in that area.
Okay, but okay, you're conflating. I understand. You're conflating how many people you're interviewing with what is the focus. So the question is, do you want to understand the head of the tribe's experiences of being the head of the tribe and leading the tribe? Or do you want to understand the plants that the tribe uses?
The plan that used by the community.
Okay, so now are you talking about you want to understand one person, the chief, you want to understand the leader and his or her lived experiences, or do you want to understand how that tribe uses plants?
How the tribe use it.
Okay, so what is your noun there? What are you studying? Are you studying the chief or are you studying the tribe?
Actually, the tribe.
The tribe. So which one is a group? Phenomenology is an individual. Which a case study is a what? A group. It's a group. You're studying a tribe, which is a group of people. So your case study would be the tribe and their uses of plants. Bam, you did it.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Oh, yes. So it depends on the whole point, and that was an excellent question because it helped us work through that. It depends on what you're focusing on. Okay. So we'll go next. Okay, so the distinctions. This is our last one, and then we will do the examples. So the distinctions. So what they have that makes them unique. So this one, the first one, case study, is it's naturalistic observation and it's unobtrusive. The ethnography is long-term cultural immersion. So that's how she knew it was not her plant study and use of medicinal plants was not an ethnography. It's not long-term cultural immersion. And cultural can be classroom culture or school culture or university culture. Phenomenology are long, in-depth interviews with a smaller number of people. And it's focused on that experiences of that person. You could do it with the leader of the tribe and what her experiences were as a leader, what were the challenges, and you interview maybe 20 times to understand her lived experience as the first woman leader of that tribe. That would be phenomenology, one example. Grounded theory is you're simultaneously gathering data and coding data, and you keep going back and forth because as you code data, you realize there are other questions you need to ask and you need to gather more data. So grounded theory is gathering data, coding data, gathering data, coding data, and then looking for those patterns until you come up with a theory that is explanatory. We could do phenomenology with the physics people. We could come up with a theory to explain why some women persist in physics and others do not. It could be phenomenology with that, but we would be focusing in depth on individuals. And then the last one is examination of text or audio. Okay. Do you have something to add, Lauren?
I was just going to add one thing. Typically, as researchers, when I go to research something, I have read much research in the past, and I've had much lived experience. And so I have some ideas on what I think the answer might be. And I've probably read other people's research, and they have shared their theories on what they think the answers might be. So I'm coming to this research with ideas or with theories of what I already think. Here's an example. I'll go back to my other example. If I want to study the self-efficacy of teachers, there is already a lot of research done on self-efficacy. There's already theories that exist. So when I go to conduct my interviews, I'm doing so with the lens of what I think self-efficacy is. And it's important that I know that and state that. But in grounded theory, I have no preconceived ideas of what self-efficacy looks like. I have no ideas of how they might respond. and it doesn't influence necessarily the questions that I'm asking. I just want to try and develop a theory of what self-efficacy is. So it's very important as a researcher, if you're doing grounded theory, that you are not already using theory that exists and using that to drive your codes from your initial codes. And so that's what she was just getting at. And in that table is that there's no theory that already exists or that you are already looking through or making assumptions about. And so grounded theory means basically you have no preconceived ideas of how they will answer these questions.
Thank you, Laura. And that was a good example to tie it back. Now, Laura does know about self-efficacy theories. So it's not that she doesn't know the theories, it's that she's not applying them in that research. So it's coming up with a theory to try that is explanatory. So you're starting out with the data. So it emerges from the data. Any questions about the comparison across?
Might be a lot to take in with
I know
all
it
of the
is a-
differences, but I
is a
think questions from the audience with the specific research question, not specific research question, but like a
We
phenomena
can,
too.
no,
Yeah.
we'll have to do that. We did one great one. I'm
Yeah.
happy to work with you individually over the next 3 days, but it's a lot because I need to ask you questions. Like we exchange lots of information. I can't answer off the top of my head until I know more about what you want to do, but I am happy to help you.
Yeah, so next Thursday, even if you're not coming in person, you're welcome to attend our Zoom meeting, and you can engage with Kathy with questions that you have after you,
Okay, we can
you
go
know,
to
you
the
get
next
all
one.
this lot of information today. Then you can connect to what you're doing for your own research project. And on Thursday, there will be specifically about publication, but we start from the, even thinking about questions. So
I do that.
hopefully that will help with
Yes.
your questions. So if not, Kathy, maybe we can continue. I know you still have a
Yes.
lot, and you
Yes.
have trustworthiness and everything else that you want to touch upon. So
Can we do the examples?
yes, sure.
We want to do the examples. I have examples for each one of these to help you see how this might fit with your research. And I know it's a lot, and then I'll share the matrix with you. Okay, next. Okay, on the first one, for case studies, these are the things you should ask yourself. And I will share these with Pak Soni so that he can share the slides with you so you can have those. So we can make those accessible to you. Ibu, sorry, we'll share those with you so you can have these to help guide you. So the case study, the thing you need to ask yourself is, will my findings describe, explain, or explore an organization, an entity, or an event? Okay, so this was looking at describing the plants that a tribe uses. So that's describing an organization. A tribe is an organization. Are you asking questions about a small group of participants or a whole group in a natural setting, like a tribe, a private home, a neighborhood, a school, or a classroom? So those are case studies. And then the example I'm giving is, how do 11 buildings level school administrators in a suburban, that's like mid-size, it's mid-size suburban school district, collect and use discipline referral data to make decisions? So what is the group? It is a group of people. What is the group of people?
Anyone? Go ahead.
Everybody? It's in blue. School administrators. So it's the school administrators. The natural setting is in their school district. So you're studying them in their school district. Okay, so that's case study. Much of educational research and qualitative involves case studies. Okay, the next one. Will I need to spend an extended amount of time trying to understand the culture and process of a group of learners in their natural context? So the key here is an extended amount of time, and it's still a group. So do you need or want or plan to immerse yourself in that participant's environment, in that community, the classroom, the tribe, the artist culture, the artist colony? And do you want to understand their culture? Do you want to understand their motivation? Okay, and then what are the example is, what are the unmet needs of consumers, people who buy things, and you observe consumers and how they interact with a product in their home. So you go to their homes and you observe how they're using a product in their intended context, which is their home. And you would spend extended time with those consumers. So any questions on ethnography? The key here, there are two things that are key to ethnography. How do you know if it's going to be an ethnography? The amount of time. It's a lot of time, and then you also include not just people, but culture. So it's a longer amount of time, and it includes the culture. Understanding the culture, not understanding the individuals.
Kathy, questions that I often get from students is about the duration of time.
Yes.
You know, it's how long would that be considered as ethnography when now people, you know, studying classroom culture, for example, for a semester, or it can be
Yes.
Shorter, or how
Yes.
do you know that the time that we commit on research
Yes.
can be the standard for ethnography?
Yes, and it's not, it could be a year, it could be years. It could be a semester. Okay, a semester usually in schools, or it could be a school year. I have a doctoral student who did from Turkey, Hatice Inanan, and she did her study in a preschool at Ohio State. She spent the entire year, every day, in that classroom, and she interacted as if she were a co-teacher or a teacher's aide. So she spent an extended amount of time, but also she was interacting with the children and the teachers. She was participating. So it's not just the time, it's also what am I doing? Am I sitting back and observing, or am I a part of that community? So it's, are you focusing on the culture? And the time is an issue. It could be one unit that's being taught. So it could be a shorter amount of time than a semester. But it's, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on people, like the teacher teaching, or the students and their learning, or are you focusing on the classroom as a culture? So it's not just the time, it's where are you focusing your lens. Does that make sense? So the culture involves more than just the people and their experiences. So good question.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, because we have a lot of other ethno with many other attachment, like ethno-mathematics. I think the math
Yes.
people will, you know, have that, oh, we have ethno-mathematics, for example, and then other things. So just to not
Yes.
confuse with what is ethnography as a research and other terms that
Yeah.
connect with other, you know,
Right.
like math as a subject, and then ethno, and what other things. So
The
maybe that help.
ethno does not mean you're doing an ethnography. This is a case study. It's ethnobiology. You're looking at the culture of people using plants. That makes it ethnobiology, but she's doing a case study about ethnobiology. It could be ethnomathematics and a case study. Very few researchers in education do ethnography. Why do you think they don't do ethnographies? Time. It's time and money. It takes a lot of time and money to do that. And that's not what your question is necessarily about. So it's where are you going to focus your lens? Great question. Okay, next. Okay, the phenomenology. This is looking at what phenomenon do you want to better understand. If the phenomenon is about women pursuing physics and persisting in the physics field, they're working in physics, then Laura wants to go in and describe about their lived experiences on what allowed them to be successful. So she would start out with one female in the physics field who got a physics degree, got a PhD in physics, and has been successful in physics. So she does multiple interviews to understand what about her made her be able to persist and be successful in this field when most women are not in that field. So what is it about her? And then she goes to one other woman, and she keeps going to more people until she's not hearing any new stories. So when she has heard she's not getting any new patterns, then she knows she's got. You could look at the other side of it. Why did these women drop out? They started as physics majors. They're smart. They're as smart as any of the male counterparts, but they quit. So why did they quit? That is the lived experience. What about their experience caused them to quit? And you start with one individual and you interview them in depth until you have a sense that you have heard their story. You interview until you understand their story, and then you go to one more person, interview 20, 30 times until you understand their story, and then you go to a third person, you interview them 15 times, you understand their story, and you learned 10 things from the first person, you learned 11 from the second person, and 3 of those were new. You learned 5 things from the third person, and nothing of that was new. So you might interview one more person, and nothing more is learned from that interview. So you make a judgment that you have learned from these 4 people some patterns on why the women persisted or why the women quit in physics. Okay, then the question here is on this one, it's individual and it's their experiences. What were your experiences in physics classes? What are your experiences in the field working in physics? It's their lived experience. Not what do they know, not how do they feel about physics, not how do they apply. It's not about how do they use the plants. It's about why did I choose to be a collector of these plants in my family tradition. That would be my lived experience. That's a different focus. It's a different question. It's a different study. So on this one, it's about students engaging in online courses. With COVID, we had a big surge in the number of online courses. We want to understand students' personal experiences with online courses. And we could look at online courses with your university. And we could start out with mathematics. We want to understand mathematics students' experiences with online courses. We start out with one student. We do the interviews. We go to the second student, do the interviews, all in mathematics. We could do mathematics education. And then we keep going until we're not hearing any new stories. Okay, and this is to understand the students' experiences and how that may be impacting what they're learning. But it's about their experiences. It's not how do they feel about the classes, it's what did they find frustrating? What did they find helpful? Why did they choose what was their experience on why they chose to take the online course? Okay, questions on phenomenology. Okay, and the last one, and you all have been awesome, very patient. Thank you. Okay, no, it's not the last one. We have one more after this one. So on phenomenology, now that we just did phenomenology. Okay, grounded theory. Okay, grounded theory. On this one, we already talked about it. It's forming a theoretical model to explain something. And it's to better understand a group's interactions. So it could be about those physics women working in the field. So this one could be to better understand these software developers. So it could be computer people on how they use portals to communicate and write code. And they're writing this code to understand how merchants approve or decline giving someone credit. So giving them a credit card or loaning them money. So how those software developers communicate and write code for shopkeepers to make these decisions. So questions on grounded theory. And on this one, you're not starting out with a theory. You want to understand their communication. So the theory, you're looking for a theory that's explanatory on why they're going to extend or decline credit. So what variables are they looking at? Okay, and now the last one. Truly the last one. Oh, grounded theory. This is what we were talking about earlier. So this one is about gathering data, doing open coding, and then coming back and doing axial coding, so secondary coding. So you read the data, you code, you go back, you do additional coding, you're putting the codes in, and you're labeling some concepts. So you put them in buckets, and then you put them in connected buckets on which concepts go together, and then you're categorizing them, but then you're going back and gathering more data, and you're doing more coding, and you're coming back and you're doing refining your categories. You might change some of your categories, you add new categories, you add new subcategories, and then you come down to where you have the selective coding at the end, where the core concepts are identified, and then you can have a theory to explain something, like why certain women persist in the field of physics.
Kathy, can
Yes.
we have maybe some more explanation? So this looks like the process of coding the data for other types of research too.
Oh,
So how is it grounded
yes.
theory as one of
Yes.
those 5 qualitative research and grounded theory as a way for us to analyze data? I think maybe some of them can relate to, this looks like something that I do,
Yes.
not necessarily understanding it as a grounded theory research.
That is exactly correct. And I am one of those people. So I use constant comparative analysis, which it came out of grounded theory. Constant comparative analysis is you're constantly comparing across your categories. So I started out with a theory, conceptual change theory, and I started out with some existing codes from the research. So I'm not without theory, and my codes are not all emergent. If you're using grounded theory, you don't start out with any codes or any theory. A lot of people use constant comparative analysis, which is what this is. You're constantly comparing and going back and gathering data and comparing across categories and looking for connections across categories. I interviewed people on what they said. I had them draw pictures. I used the pictures. I had them talk about the pictures. I had them use 3D models. I had them talk about 3D models. I used models myself, and they talked about how I used the models. And then they did a card sorting, and they talked about their card sorting. So I looked across all of those data sources and did comparisons across the data sources. I looked at it from pre to post, and I looked at it across participants. So constant comparative analysis can be used in other research. But mine was not grounded theory, and I had to explain that in my research methods because I started with a theory and I started with codes. I did allow codes to emerge, and I gave examples of that, but I was not developing theory. So I did not develop a theory about why some students learned the science concepts and others did not.
Kathy, can I add just a quick
Yes.
comment? So an example of case study when I was using constant comparative. I had existing theory or ideas for my first open coding. So after the interviews, I wanted to know their confidence. How did they describe confidence? How did they describe motivation? How did they describe their anxiety? And because I already had these codes preconceived based on theory, it was not grounded theory. And I was still using open coding at first, but with some theory in mind. That was a case study. But then when I did a grounded theory research, I conducted the interviews and then I looked at the transcripts and I had no preconceived ideas of what I was looking for. But I noticed that everybody in here mentioned one thing in common. So I thought, oh, if they've all mentioned this one thing, I see this pattern, I'm going to pull out that, and that becomes my code. I didn't know it was going to be there. I didn't know what that one thing was that they were all going to have in common. So now this is a grounded theory open code with no preconceived ideas or no codes already before when I started the analysis process.
Okay, and the difference here, it's a great question. The difference is about is theory being generated. Are you starting with a theory? If you're starting with a theory, like I started with conceptual change theory, I also started with existing codes because there is a scientific phenomenon that we were describing. So I had codes, it was not all open coding. I had a coding sheet, but I used constant comparative analysis as my methodology for analyzing the data. So I was doing a case study in a physics course. But the difference is with grounded theory, you don't start with a theory, you generate a theory. So great question. And it's explanatory. You need to be explaining something. Explaining why women persist in physics or don't persist in physics. Explaining why some people do experience conceptual change and some people do not. So if you're explaining something rather than describing something, then that would be grounded. Now, if you're explaining, it would not be grounded theory. Wait, shoot, I'm saying it wrong. I'm tired. Well, I actually have a sinus infection. If you're explaining something, it is grounded theory. If you're describing something, it's case study or ethnography. So that's the big key. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the methods of inquiry for historical, the key here, you're looking at text, recordings, transcripts, and the one at the bottom, you're looking at power balances or imbalances that occur in communications. Those would be written transcripts and recordings between doctors and nurses during a surgical setting. So you're not interviewing the doctors, you're not interviewing the nurses, you're looking at the dynamic between them based on what happened in that setting. You're not observing them, not interviewing them, you're looking at transcripts or recordings. And that would be archival data or historical. Okay, for the last one, last slide. Okay, so this is the QR code. I hope it goes there with the, can we reduce that to one screen? We can reduce it to one screen, then you'll be able to click on it, take the photo, and the matrix should download for you. There we go. See if that'll work.
It's okay. If you don't get the QR code right now, I will provide you with the slides, so don't worry. You still can download it. This should be the matrix, right, Kathy? Is it the matrix? That they will, the QR code will go to the matrix where you have the complete comparison, or is this something else? Okay. All right.
You should have, can you access it? Did it come up? Yes.
Okay, great.
So that's the matrix that we went over. That helps you to decide, but we wanted to talk about each one so you would understand it. But I'm happy to answer any questions. Can you switch all the way down to the last slide? To the very bottom. I'm leaving these with Ibu Sari, and she can go over these with you about theoretical frameworks, trustworthiness. But this is the last slide. On the last slide, Tara Makasi. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to work with you. I'm going to answer questions. Thank you. And thank Laura. So the tag teaming. My email address is there, and I'm happy to answer questions, and we'll be here through the rest of the week. I hope to see you on Thursday, and we can work on some of the things about publishing. A first step is coming up with a question and methods that would be publishable. So that's the necessary first step, or you can't publish it.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for such a complete description of all these approaches in qualitative research. It's a lot to take in for everyone, and for some of you who has taken research class, I think you can relate to many of what we have discussed. But we still have time for Q&A, Kathy. So you can sit down or you can stand up, however you want. But I will open. Yeah, me too. Laura, you're welcome to stand up too. We've been sitting for quite a while from the beginning of our session today. So everyone, we are opening a session where you can ask questions from the first section until the last one that we talk about, or any other thing related to qualitative research. So the Q&A in the beginning were divided into sections. But now we are at the end of our workshop, so any questions from what we have discussed so far, you are welcome. If you want to ask in Bahasa Indonesia, I will translate that for you. Okay, questions? Or if you are doing a research and you wanted to know more about, particularly in qualitative, you are welcome to also share. Like we have done before with the example of research, that will help.
Also, anything from our online folks, our Zoom
We have
folks.
one question from this room, and then we'll also check in the Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Sari, for the chance. My name is Aditya. So I would like to ask you, Prof. Kathy. So how do we know, as a researcher, that our participant answering the correct answer.
Ah.
Yes, because in qualitative data we do interview. Maybe our participant give wrong answer because they shy. All also they have anxious when they answer the question from us. So that's it. Thank you.
That's a
Thank you,
really
Adam.
great question.
Pleasing the researcher with certain types of answer,
Yeah.
maybe.
So this is a great question because you're interviewing people, you're interviewing participants, and your data depend on them being comfortable giving you their honest perspective or their honest answer. So part of that is establishing a relationship as well as you can, starting out with there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. I want to know what you think. You know, this is not about right or wrong. This is about me. I really want to understand your experience. So sometimes it's about talking to them a little bit up front, establishing some rapport, letting them get to know you a little bit, you get to know them a little bit, and then reassuring them that there are no wrong answers. But you're right, it is an issue, but the hope is you have enough people in your group to where they will give you overall. But that's a limitation, but it's a limitation on quantitative also. So oftentimes, sometimes people will give you the answer they think you want. So it's tricky with working with human subjects. But it's a great point. Thank you for the question.
We have a questions on the chat box, Kathy, if you can see it here.
Mathematics.
In mathematics learning problems, it allows us to do qualitative research, but in the process, we still involve numbers. What do you think?
And that's a good question too. So in terms of doing mixed methods, that's what you're talking about, mixed methods. You want to make sure about what question you're asking as to how you gather the data and how you analyze the data. I had 135 participants in a qualitative study. So that's very large. Usually it's smaller numbers, like 50 or below. So I had percentages. I had some way to organize them, but then I also included excerpts from the transcript. So I didn't do any statistical analysis with it because of the way I'd gathered my data, and that would not have helped me to answer the questions. So just because you have numbers doesn't mean that they're going to be something that you could statistically analyze and have any meaning from. Because if you're going to statistically analyze, the things you need to think about are validity and reliability of your instrument and the number of your participants. So just because you have numbers doesn't mean you'll necessarily use them for statistical analysis.
Okay, this is another question. It's in Bahasa Indonesia, but I will translate it right away. It's from Wiwit Artika. So how do we ensure our data analysis and discussion is already good? So you're doing the data analysis the right way, and then so that you can come to the right conclusion from your analysis. Particularly in qualitative research.
Yeah, okay, this is the part that we didn't get to in the presentation. It has to do with trustworthiness. So can we pull up
sure, we can share that again just a little bit
on
to answer the question.
trustworthiness? Because that is a really great question. And I'm going to take you back to what you said at the very beginning. You said at the very beginning that research was systematic. So it needs to be systematic and thorough. So I told you all of my data sources. Drawings, what they said about their drawings, how they use models, what they said about their models, what they said about how I use the models, and then also about, a card sorting. So I had 7 different ways to ask them questions. So I had 7 different types of data from each person. So would we have more confidence by looking at this from different angles with different kinds of data with 7 or with 1? If I just interviewed and listened to what they said, which one would give us more confidence, do you think, in the findings? 7 data points per person or 1 data point per person? In this case, is more better? More is better in this case because I'm looking at not just what they say, but what they draw. Also, how they sort these pictures. Also, how they use models. So part of that is called crystallization or triangulation. The reason we've switched to crystallization, this is how do we know that we've gotten the right things. Triangulation implies 3 things. You can triangulate with 2 things. You can triangulate with 2 things. You don't have to have 3. I had 7 things to triangulate between. So crystallization means you can use multiple approaches. You can use documentation. These are different ways you can gather data. You can do in-depth interviews, you can do observations, you can take photos, you can have formal communications. So you're looking at other kinds of ways you can gather data. So if you're making observations and you're doing interviews, you're more likely to have more data to better understand what you're trying to describe. Okay, and we can back up a few slides. Okay, trustworthiness, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is confidence. That's what you're talking about. Confidence in data, interpretation, and methods that are used to ensure the quality of a study. So to do that, on the next one, credibility means that you talk about your experiences, that you've been trained, you've taken research courses, you've done a research workshop, you might have done a pilot study, you might have worked on someone else's research study. Mine gave me credibility because I was a classroom teacher and I taught earth and space science. So I had specialized education in earth and space science training, and I was doing research in earth and space science. So you establish your credibility. That means, how do we know that you are competent to do this research? You write about it in your write-up. Here's what I've done to prepare myself to be able to do this research. And it helps if you've done a pilot study or you've worked on another research project. So think about who you are as a credible individual, a credible researcher. Okay, the next one is dependability of the data. Dependability of the data means that I've got more than one data source. I've got observations, I've got interviews, and I can look across these data sources and I can see the patterns. That the results are dependable because I've looked at multiple different ways to gather the data. I also interviewed the professor of the course. I looked at the textbook materials. I looked at their notebooks, their science notebooks, and their journals. So I looked at things beyond my interviews. And I had a very thorough systematic. Being dependable means systematic and thorough. So rather than relying on one interview. Okay? And you can do only interviews, but you're going to make sure that it's a very systematic interview. Transparency is that you are telling people what you've done in terms of you share your protocols. So in my back of my dissertation, the interview protocol, the coding sheet, and I included excerpts from my transcripts from my data that I had coded so people could see, do I agree with this or not? Does this woman look like she knows what she's talking about? And would I be able to take what she's done? Has she given me enough description? Has she given me enough information to where I could replicate this study? That's transparency. I'm not hiding what I did. I'm sharing data, and if someone contacted me, I would share my data with them. That is transparency. Because I'm willing to share that with people, I'm transparent. That makes it more believable that that's what I've done. Or they can look at it and say, well, she's shown me what she did, but it was not very rigorous. But if I show them and it's rigorous, that is transparency. Sharing my protocols and sharing my data and sharing coded data within my report. That's transparent. Okay, and transferability means that I describe the context well enough to where people can understand what was done and where it was done and see connections with their place. So I described the university. What was the size of the university? Where was it located? What types of students were in that class? So the richer the description of the place and the people, describing the context and the participants, makes people be able to transfer it into their context. They understand what you've done, and they can make a judgment, could I do that in my school? So this is a description of context and participants. The previous one about transparency was sharing descriptions of your protocols and your data. Credibility is description of me. Who am I as a researcher? Part of that is positionality, about who am I in terms of an individual, looking up, and I could work with them sometime online on your position statement, who you are as a researcher. You let people know who you are in your positionality and how that might affect your research. So you're disclosing and describing yourself, credibility, transparency, describing in thorough detail your protocols and your data and your coding. Transferability, describing your participants well, and that's their as much as you can tell them demographically, helps people understand your participants. As much as you can tell them demographically about your context, that helps them to understand, is this transferable or not? All of this you're explaining in your methods section. And then crystallization, this is like triangulation. You have more than one data point, one data source. So even if you're just doing interviews, you're interviewing, I did just interviews, data gathering with my participants. I had multiple ways to get data from them, what they said, what they did with models, what they did with drawings, what they drew, how they did the card sorting, how they responded to my use of models. That's a very systematic, thorough protocol. So find a good protocol and make sure that you have multiple data points so that you can crystallize. You have more confidence in your data. Someone reading it has more confidence in the data. Thank you for the question, because that was the last part of our presentation that we didn't have time to get to. We got it. And thank you for your patience and your time and your persistence. You're amazing. You're beautiful and amazing.
Thank you so
Terima kasih.
much, Kathy and Laura, for sharing your thoughts and experience in doing qualitative research. I'm really glad that we could cover the last part of our agenda today through questions. So I was thinking maybe we'll get that in the questions. So and with that questions we have from the participant, we could cover our agenda for today from the very beginning. We talk about inquiry, what it means to do inquiry, and what make it as a research. And when we say something about research, what it should have, what aspects that we can consider as research. And from there, we talk about perspective or paradigms. And I hope everyone here, graduate students, will be refreshed with that. I believe we have some discussion on that too. And then the matrix, I think really great, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. It's really make it very accessible for students to do the comparison. I know these kind of topics should be covered like a whole semester, but we managed to get some of them, most of them, actually in our workshop. And of course, you should do your own reading after this to get more information. So the textbooks that you have might help you with very specific ideas of each of the approaches that we talk about today.
I will put the PowerPoint in a PDF, and we will share that with you. And it has detailed notes for each one of the slides, which will help you. Sama. The other thing is, the one thing we didn't get to were theoretical perspectives. Those are, in general, positivist, post-positivist, constructivist, social constructivist, critical, and participatory. And I have a lot of notes on those. I have more notes on that than other slides. So you may read those, and I hope they're helpful to you. If you have any questions, email me.
Thanks again, Kathy, for being so generous with your sources and your notes. I think that's what we really need. I believe students really looking forward to the professor notes, because that's really helpful for everyone, and especially in the graduate program. So thanks again, Kathy and Laura, for our session today.
And thank you. You were awesome. That was a long time.
Yes. Thank you very much for your great participation. For those who are in this room, as well as those on the Zoom. So I will hand it back to our MC, but I think we'll do photo session after this. Pak Sony, Pak Eriansyah, Tita, Bu Zahra, Rani in the back. Nanti kita ada beberapa sesi. Oh, maybe after Laura's coming back. Okay. Nanti bisa bersiap-siap ya, yang dari MIPA, Bu Ernalida juga, jangan lupa Uni, sorry, baru terlihat dari samping. Students, you can also get ready. I think we have a few minutes. Yes. Silakan. Kemudian nanti Susi bisa diorganize yang dari MIPA ya, yang ada di sini bisa kita foto setelahnya. Silakan. Siapa lagi Uni yang mungkin ketinggalan? Let's take the gimana Mas Budi bagusnya? Nah, S2 ya. Students, jadi Bu Santi sudah pulang atau kita tunggu Laura dulu. Nah, Dedi ya, sorry. Siapa lagi yang belum terlihat? Oh ya, Halida, sorry ya, tidak begitu kelihatan tadi.
Kami undang seluruh dosen dari jurusan MIPA, seluruh dosen Kaor Prodi dari jurusan MIPA, silahkan come to the stage. Seluruh dosen jurusan MIPA. I would like to ask. Okay, thank you for all the students and please. Ya, oh foto dari. Thank you. I think that's enough for now. And I'd like to invite Sari to join us here to present a certificate of appreciations for our speakers. Thank you so much for your insightful workshop today, Prof. Kathy and Prof. Laura. And we still have another one. Okay, that concludes our workshop today. May this workshop serve as a stepping stone for our future research activities and contribute to the betterment of the society. I would like to thank you, our speakers, once again for their wonderful presentations and also sharing their expertise and insights with us. With that, we officially conclude the Qualitative Research Workshop. On behalf of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sriwijaya, I wish you all the best and have a wonderful day ahead. I am Tita Ratna Wulandari. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and give big round of applause for our speakers and moderator. Thank you, Prof. Kathy and Prof. Laura. I think terima kasih, Bu Dwi. Kepada peserta dimohon untuk menunggu sebentar ya. Apakah nanti ada kelanjutan dari panitia atau bagaimana lagi dikonfirmasikan. Mohon untuk menunggu sebentar, sekitar 10 atau sekitar 5 menit.